Welcome to another episode of the Restoration Obscura Field Guide, a podcast that unearths the forgotten corners of history and brings them back into the light. Each episode goes beyond headlines and textbook dates into the places, decisions, and moments that helped shape our world, even if they were left off the official record. These stories are built from archives, old photographs, and the physical traces still etched into the landscape. Here's your host, photographer, historian, and the creator of Restoration Obscura, John Bulmer.
There's a place in the Berkshires I keep going back to. It's quiet there, but not the peaceful kind. The air feels thick. Your footsteps echo too sharply. It's a place that feels disconnected from the rest of the world because of the deep valley walls. Cell service drops off. The trees lean inward, and there's always a low drone of something you can't quite place. And at the bottom of that valley runs a stretch of old railroad flanked by skeletal bridges and the closed Yankee Atomic Electric Plant. But what draws me back again and again is the east portal of a tunnel that runs straight through the mountain. They call it the Bloody Pit, and if you've heard of it, you probably know why. This episode is the expanded audio companion to my Bloody Pit history, available on restorationobscura.com. This is the story of the Hoosac Tunnel, but it's more than that. It's a story about why we're drawn to places like this in the first place. There's something in the human spirit that gravitates towards stories carved into stone and loss. Something that recognizes, even subconsciously, the weight of places where time seems to hesitate. These are places where history didn't just happen, it lingered. Places like the Hoosac Tunnel are where memory settles into the land and stays there, even when names fade. We live in a world obsessed with speed, scrolling, refreshing, moving on, but there's value in slowing down, in returning, in standing still at the edge of a place where people once risked everything for progress and many paid with their lives. We need stories like this, not because they're haunted, but because they're human. Because in remembering the Bloody Pit, we remember the ambition and the danger of our industrial past. We remember that every tunnel, every track, every bit of forward motion came with a price, and that price wasn't always measured in dollars. It was measured in names we never learned and voices long silenced. Places like this ask us to listen more closely, and stories like this help us remember what we're in danger of forgetting. When I first started out as a photographer, fresh out of art school, I was pulled into the world of urban exploration. There was a thrill to it. But what stayed with me wasn't the danger, it was the quiet. The way a place could feel frozen in time. Discovering an abandoned building felt like reading the last page of a history book. Everything was still. Everything waited. I found beauty in decay, peeling paint, broken windows, but I was also fascinated by what came before. These weren't just ruins. They were the shells of someone's everyday life. Factories where hundreds once clocked in, homes where children grew up, train stations, hospitals, power plants. I used to stand in those empty rooms and wonder, did they ever think about what it would look like after they were gone? Do any of us? And that's what pushed me deeper into historical work. It wasn't just about the photograph anymore. From those early explorations, I began to realize that what I truly had was a passion for places with history. I didn't have a name for it yet. I was just chasing curiosity, camera in hand. But all these years later, it makes sense. While I don't chase abandoned places the way I used to, I'm still drawn to places with deep history, places wrapped in lore, legend. Photography remains the best platform I know to explore them. It lets me document these places before they vanish, lost to progress, development, or simple neglect. It captures not just what a place looks like, but what it feels like to stand there. And this passion doesn't just apply to dramatic ruins or remote tunnels. Some of the most powerful stories are waiting in plain sight. Old storefronts, weathered street corners, buildings we pass 100 times without seeing. They live in the stories passed from neighbor to neighbor. These stories matter. not because they're big, but because they're ours. They create a sense of place, a sense of belonging. They remind us that history isn't always found in a book. It's something we inherit, often without realizing it. Mystery, I think, is one of the most important things we can carry with us, because mystery invites curiosity. And curiosity gives us wonder. And wonder is what keeps the world interesting. It keeps us asking. It keeps us searching. A world that was fully known and defined, that wouldn't be much fun at all. Those are the spaces where imagination lives, where stories grow, where we stay connected, not just to the past, but to each other. The Hoosac Tunnel is just under 5 miles long, carved directly through the solid mass of Hoosac Mountain in western Massachusetts. Construction began in 1851 and didn't finish until 1875. It took nearly a quarter century of backbreaking labor, political wrangling, and brutal sacrifice to push the project forward, and for every foot of progress, there was a cost. It was one of the most ambitious engineering feats of its time, and also one of the deadliest. Official records say nearly 200 men died during construction, but unofficially, the number may be much higher. There are quiet stories about men buried where they fell, bodies lost in rock falls, washed away in floods, or simply never recovered. Gaps in payroll records, gaps in the names. It wasn't just a tunnel, it was a reckoning. A monument to ambition, paid for in dust and blood. And today, nearly 150 years later, it's still active. Freight trains still thunder through the mountain several times a day. There are no lights inside, no room for error, no way to turn around. You don't walk into the Hoosac, you stand back, you listen. What you hear isn't just trains. Sound behaves differently there. The tunnel's length and curve create a strange kind of acoustics. There's a delay to every echo. The tunnel hums with low, constant pressure, like the mountain itself is breathing. That sound builds in layers, air passing over stone, water dripping through cracks, steel expanding and contracting with the temperature. Sometimes when the air is still and the world is quiet, it almost sings. Not a melody, just a resonance, a held note made of wind and weight and time. When a train finally comes, it doesn't just arrive, it announces itself. Long before you see it, you feel it. A low-frequency rumble that grows like a distant storm. Then it hits, pushing a wall of air ahead like a wave in slow motion. That air slams into the tunnel's mouth, spins leaves into the air. Then the train bursts from the dark, 100 tons of steel and gravity, and as it disappears, it pulls the tunnel's breath with it. What's left is silence, the kind that rings in your ears. Back in the early 2000s, before security tightened after 9/11, I stepped inside the tunnel just once. I didn't go far, but I remember every step. The temperature dropped, the walls were wet, my headlamp barely cut through the dark. I passed rusted rail spikes, old timbers, and rusted iron buried in gravel. It felt like entering a lung made of stone. Every breath echoed back wrong, like it belonged to someone else. The space compresses you, makes you aware of your own body, your heartbeat, your breath, your weight. Then something shifts. The silence bends. The tunnel doesn't just surround you, it presses in. I turned around and walked out fast. You don't linger in a place like that, but I keep going back, not inside, just to the edge, and I listen and photograph. It's one of those places that's always exciting to visit because of all the lore associated with it. Let's rewind to how it all began. In the mid-19th century, Massachusetts faced a problem. It needed a direct rail route between Boston and the markets of upstate New York, a lifeline for trade and growth. But the Berkshire Mountains stood in the way, specifically the Hoosac Range, a long ridge of granite that seemed impenetrable. Engineers proposed something radical, a tunnel straight through the mountain. At the time, it was considered nearly impossible, but that didn't stop them from trying. Work began in 1851, slowly, painfully, dangerously. Everything was done by hand in those early years. No pneumatic drills, no mechanical diggers, just sweat, hammers, and steel. Picture two men crouched under flickering lamplight, one holding a long steel drill, the other swinging a sledgehammer. Strike, twist, That was double jacking. When the hole was deep enough, they packed it with black powder, lit the fuse, and ran like hell. Then they'd return to shovel out the broken stone, called muck, by hand. There was no ventilation. The air turned black with dust and smoke. Candles sputtered. Men coughed up blood. And when nitroglycerin came into use in the 1860s, things got even more volatile. It was powerful, but terrifyingly unstable. It didn't take much. A dropped container, a stray spark, and everything could go up in a flash. And often it did. Later, technology crept in. Steam-powered hoists, compressed air drills, more refined blasting techniques. They even sank a vertical shaft nearly 1,000 feet into the mountain to speed up progress and improve airflow. That shaft, the central shaft, was meant to be a breakthrough. Instead, it became a tomb. On the night of October 17th, 1867, 13 men were working deep within the shaft. A canister of nitroglycerin had leaked. Someone left a candle burning too close. What started as a flicker became an inferno. The nitro exploded. The hoisting platform, a massive elevator used to haul men and rock, was blasted to pieces. Tools and timbers were hurled skyward like shrapnel. Then came the collapse. Fire tore through the wooden supports. The shaft filled with thick, toxic smoke. Some men died instantly. Others were trapped, burned, and suffocated. Water poured in from broken pipes in desperate firefighting. It didn't matter. The men below had no way out. Above ground, rescuers could hear their screams, but they couldn't reach them. The fire raged for hours. The smoke lingered for days. It took nearly a year, an entire year, to clear the wreckage and pump out the water. And when the crew finally recovered the bodies, they were barely recognizable. Skeletons in scorched clothes, bone fused to rusted iron. The smell was so strong it stayed in your clothes, your hair, your lungs. Survivors said it never really left. They were buried in a mass grave. Not all their names were recorded. After that, the central shaft changed. Workers refused to go near it at night. They said the air around it felt heavier, colder, like something watched from the dark. They said you could hear voices that didn't belong to the living. That tragedy became a turning point. It fused engineering with mortality, progress with grief, and it sealed the tunnel's second name in local memory, the Bloody Pit. The central shaft wasn't just a construction site. It became a symbol of everything that could go wrong when ambition outruns caution. By the time of the 1867 explosion, the Hoosac Tunnel project was already known as a financial sinkhole, a political lightning rod, and a graveyard for innovation. It was nicknamed the Great Bore, both for its size and for the frustration it caused taxpayers and lawmakers alike. But underground, politics didn't matter. Only survival did. The laborers were mostly Irish immigrants and Civil War veterans, men who had already known hardship. They worked for less than $2 a day in conditions that would be illegal now. Many lived in rough camps near the tunnel site, crammed into wooden shacks that offered little protection from the Massachusetts winter. The company offered little in the way of safety. No hard hats, no respirators, no reliable oversight. If you were injured, you were replaced. If you were killed, your tools were passed on. Progress didn't pause, not even for the dead. There was always tension between hope and dread. For every foot of tunnel cleared, the men knew the next blast might be their last. They worked in near darkness, inhaling black powder residue and toxic fumes, trusting that the man swinging the hammer wouldn't miss. It took a rare kind of resolve, or desperation, to keep showing up. When the central shaft caught fire, it wasn't just an accident. It was the outcome of every shortcut, every risk taken to stay on schedule, every ignored warning. And the fact that it took nearly a year to recover those men, just to bring them home, was a brutal indictment of how far things had gone. A year of waiting, of smelling fire in the earth, of knowing they were still down there. Some say the shaft never really cooled, that even now, if you stand near it, you can feel something rising, something old and heavy in the air. And that's when the stories began. Almost as soon as the tunnel neared completion, accounts of strange occurrences emerged, repeated in local taverns, printed in careful phrases in the papers. They said you could hear voices from the shaft, whispers, sometimes screams. Others felt a sudden cold breeze pass through them, even when the air was dead still. Tools moved on their own, lights flickered, shadows fell where no one stood. The most persistent stories center on a man named Ringo Kelly. In 1865, 2 years before the Central Shaft tragedy, Kelly allegedly set off a blast charge too early, killing 2 fellow workers. Whether through guilt or fear, he disappeared shortly after. A year later, his body was found in the same area, strangled. No signs of struggle, no witnesses. Some said the spirits of the men he killed had taken revenge. Others said it was justice from the living hidden by silence. No one ever came forward, and then came reports of phantom workers, men in old-fashioned clothing, swinging picks or carrying lanterns, visible for only a moment before vanishing into the rock. Some looked confused, unsure of their surroundings. Others locked eyes with those who saw them, then faded into the wall. Even after the tunnel opened to rail traffic in 1875, the stories didn't stop. In June of 1872, Dr. Clifford Owens, a Boston physician and a construction superintendent, entered the tunnel to investigate persistent disturbances. 2 miles in, they claimed to see a glowing, headless figure floating just above the tracks. Owens later described a presence that made the air thinner, colder, harder to breathe. The figure lingered, then disappeared into the dark. It was never identified. These aren't just ghost stories passed around campfires. Some accounts came from engineers and foremen, men with no interest in the supernatural. But the tunnel made believers out of many. It's hard to work in a place soaked in that much death and not feel it pressing in. Some said they heard their names called faintly in the dark, only to find no one there. Others felt invisible walls of cold, as if stepping through a hidden doorway. One recurring story speaks of a single blue light, a steady bobbing glow like a lantern, seen walking the tracks. Rail crews reported watching it from the eastern portal. It would sway gently, as if someone were walking, until it reached a certain point, then vanish. No footsteps, no figure, just gone. Some believe it's a lost worker still on his route. Others say it's tied to the central shaft. That energy like that doesn't disappear, it just waits. Even now, long after the last drill fell silent, people still report strange sounds, pressure shifts, and feelings they can't explain. Paranormal investigators have visited, but it's the accidental witnesses, the hikers, the maintenance crews, the train conductors who offer the most convincing accounts, because they weren't looking for ghosts, they just found something they couldn't forget. I photographed a lot of forgotten places, mills, fire towers, abandoned rail spurs, weathered barns, but the Hoosac Tunnel is something else. It's not just an artifact, it's an echo chamber, a living question carved into a mountain. It's a monument not just of stone and steel, but of the breath and blood of hundreds of men whose names we never bothered to remember. The photos I take here aren't just for documentation, they're for understanding, for acknowledgement. I shoot with old equipment, large format, long exposures, antique lenses, not for aesthetic, but for intention. Those tools force me to slow down, to be deliberate, to stand still long enough to see beyond the obvious. There's no burst mode, no instant preview, just patience and trust in the process. The same trust those early workers had in the man swinging the hammer behind them. Early photographers believed the camera could reveal things the eye missed, that it could peel back the surface and show something deeper, maybe even spiritual. In places like this, maybe they were right, because when I look through the focusing glass, I don't just see stone and track, I see time, I see presence. Photography, when it works, isn't about making something beautiful. It's about making something present. It's a kind of listening, a way of asking a place what it still remembers. The Hoosac Tunnel remembers. You can feel it, the weight of every hammer strike, every man who entered the dark and didn't come back out. The tunnel isn't haunted by ghosts. It's haunted by memory. That's why I keep going back, not to solve a mystery, not to chase a legend, but to witness, to bear witness to what's still here, even if most have forgotten it. because some stories need a second telling, and some places deserve someone to show up, look through the lens, and say, I see you, you mattered. The Hoosac Tunnel is just one of many places like this. Across New York and beyond, you'll find their siblings, places where the industrial age collided with wilderness, where communities rose and fell, and where the land still remembers. One of the first large-scale abandoned complexes I ever explored was Tahawa's. Hidden deep in the Adirondacks, just outside the High Peaks wilderness, it was once a booming mining town, first built around iron ore, then titanium. During World War II, the U.S. government revived operations for the war effort. The village had housing, schools, its own infrastructure, a self-contained world in the woods. But when the mines dried up, so did everything else. The town was abandoned, left to decay. Nature returned slowly, but the shape of human life remained in road layouts, foundation lines, and stories locals shared while pointing at maps. At the heart of the complex was something I'd never seen in the Adirondacks or anywhere in New York, a man-made reservoir disconnected from the watershed. The water inside was turquoise, almost alpine. And at its bottom stood a submerged forest. Real intact trees, branches and all, preserved underwater. Their trunks reached up through the stillness, and it was like floating above a perfectly preserved forest untouched for decades. The mine had a firehouse, an airstrip, amenities that signaled permanence, ambition, self-sufficiency. They weren't just mining, they were building a community. And yet, despite all that planning, it was still temporary. The buildings fell silent. The forest crept back. The airstrip cracked and crumbled. Today, it's hard to believe so much life once pulsed through those woods. The complex is gone now, torn down, cleared. Even places erased from the physical map still deserve to live in memory. The camera at its best isn't just a tool for looking back, it's a tool for keeping things alive. Evidence not just of what was built, but of what was lost. They remind us that the past isn't buried deep. It lingers just beneath the surface. That's the thing about these places. They rise, they fall, and then they vanish, unless someone takes the time to remember them, or better yet, to show them. You just have to know where to look. The Hoosac Tunnel isn't alone. Across the country and the world, there are places like it. Places where ambition collided with danger, where history wasn't preserved so much as buried. Old mining shafts in Pennsylvania where hills collapsed and took families with them. Coal breakers in Scranton and Shenandoah where boys once sorted slate until their lungs gave out. The Centralia mine fire still burning beneath a dead town, the Silverton tunnels in Colorado, the ghost towns of Nevada, the wartime shipbuilding yards in Groton, now silent. Each has its story. Each holds a trace of those who passed through, often workers, immigrants, the invisible hands of progress. And still, they call to us. Maybe it's because they remind us that everything we build has a cost. Maybe it's because deep down, we know we're walking on top of chapters that haven't fully closed. Places like this matter for the same reason the Hoosac Tunnel matters. They're evidence of effort, of error, of sacrifice, and they give us something we don't get from timelines or textbooks, presence. They're immersive, emotional, unresolved, and most importantly, they keep mystery alive. That's where imagination meets research, where memory meets curiosity. That's where Restoration Obscura begins. These aren't just places to photograph, they're places to feel. And once you feel them, you don't forget. The Bloody Pit isn't just an engineering feat. It's a wound carved into the mountain, one that never fully healed. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Field Guide. I love hearing from people who tune into the podcast or read the articles. And if you have any stories, memories, or photos of the tunnel, I'd really love to see them. You can get in touch through restorationobscura.com. Before we close, I want to be absolutely clear about something, because it matters. Places like the Hoosac Tunnel are undeniably compelling, and that fascination is real. I understand it because I felt it. But it's important to remember, these places are also incredibly dangerous, and in most cases, entering them is illegal. That includes not just historic tunnels like the Hoosac, but any active or abandoned infrastructure, particularly rail systems, power plants, storm drains, reservoirs, and waterworks. These are not playgrounds. They're high-risk environments with real consequences. Trains don't stop. Power stations are lethal. And access to these areas is often restricted for good reason. Trespassing in these spaces can lead to arrest or worse. People have been injured. People have died. Many of the stories I've told in Restoration Obscura come from the safety of public access points, historical records, or collaborations with professionals who know how to navigate these environments legally and responsibly. I never encourage entering restricted or unsafe locations. Curiosity is powerful, but it should always be guided by caution, respect, and a deep understanding of what's at stake. Please explore safely. Stay on legal ground. Let your curiosity lead you to research, preservation, storytelling, not to danger. Because the best way to honor places like the Hoosac Tunnel is to make sure we're still around to tell their stories. You can subscribe to Restoration Obscura at restorationobscura.com. This podcast is copyright 2025 John Bulmer Media and Restoration Obscura. All rights reserved. No reuse, rebroadcast, or repurposing of any content is permitted without express written permission. The Restoration Obscura Field Guide podcast is available on all major streaming platforms. If you enjoyed what you heard, please like and subscribe. It truly helps us reach more listeners. Thanks for listening. I'm John Bulmer, and remember, every photo has a story, and every story connects us. Until next time, take care.